10 days after my son got married, his new wife walked into my house with an attorney and asked me to sign what she called a routine family protection agreement. She smiled when she said it, the same polished smile she had worn at the wedding while telling everyone how lucky she felt to be part of our family. But the attorney did not smile at all. He placed a leather folder on my dining room table, opened it to a page marked with yellow tabs, and said, "Mr. Keene, this simply allows Aaron and Brooke to assist you with financial matters if you ever become unable to handle them yourself." I was 69 years old, not 99, and until 8 months earlier I had spent 43 years reading commercial loan agreements for a living. They did not know that, because my son Aaron had always described me as a retired bank clerk. I had never corrected him. He had been a boy when I started moving into senior credit management, and by the time he was old enough to understand what I did, my wife, Margaret, and I had already decided that our finances were not something our child needed to measure his life against. So I sat there in my old blue work shirt, with a coffee stain near the cuff and a pair of reading glasses from the drugstore, and let Brooke explain my own future to me. "It is just protection, Thomas," she said. "Aaron worries about you being out here alone. If something happens, we should not have to fight through probate or court paperwork just to pay your bills." Aaron sat beside her and stared at the tabletop. That bothered me more than Brooke's rehearsed concern. My son had never been good at lying to my face. When he was 12, he once broke a neighbor's window with a baseball and confessed before I even asked what happened, because he could not stand the look of disappointment he imagined I might give him. Now he was 42, married for 10 days, and could not look at me while a lawyer handed me documents that supposedly existed for my protection. I flipped the first page slowly. Durable power of attorney, broad authority over banking, real estate, insurance, brokerage accounts. Fine. Aggressive, but not unheard of. Then I reached page 7. There, buried between paragraphs about refinancing and asset preservation, was language authorizing my agent to pledge residential property as collateral for obligations of any affiliated entity in which a family member held a financial interest. I read it twice. Then I turned 3 pages farther and found a deed of trust authorization tied to my home on 6 acres outside Lexington. My mortgage had been paid off 19 years earlier. Brooke leaned forward. "You don't need to get lost in the legal language. Dennis can explain it." The attorney gave me a patient little nod. "It's standard flexibility, Mr. Keene." I looked at him over my glasses and said, "Standard for what?" His eyes shifted for half a second toward Brooke. That was all I needed. I closed the folder and rested both hands on top of it. "My eyes are tired," I said. "Leave it with me tonight." Brooke's smile tightened. "We actually need it filed by Friday." It was Monday afternoon. 4 days. Exact deadline. I asked why. She answered too quickly. "The estate planning office is closing some files before quarter end." Aaron finally looked at me, and there was something in his face I had not seen since he was a teenager, standing in a principal's office. Fear. Not guilt. Fear. I nodded as if I believed every word. Then Friday should be plenty of time. Dennis, the attorney, reached for the folder, but I put my palm on it. "You want my signature? I keep the paperwork." He hesitated. Brooke laughed softly and said, "Of course." Then she stood, kissed the air near my cheek, and told me we would have dinner soon. I watched their black SUV turn down my gravel driveway and disappear past the line of maples Margaret planted when Aaron was born. Then I locked the front door, carried the folder into my study, and called the one person Aaron had never met. "Evelyn," I said when she answered, "I need you to look at something tonight." Evelyn Price had been my personal attorney for 16 years. She had handled Margaret's estate, my business interests, and the private partnership my wife had left behind when she died. "What kind of something?" she asked. I looked at page 7 again and felt the old part of my mind wake up, the part that used to find trouble hidden in a footnote while everyone else was admiring the projections, the kind my son hopes I will sign before I understand it. Evelyn arrived at 8:30 that evening with a legal pad, a laptop, and the expression she usually reserved for people who had just made expensive mistakes. I made coffee while she read. She did not say a word for almost 20 minutes. Then she removed her glasses and said, "Thomas, if you sign this, Aaron receives authority to encumber your house, access your liquid accounts, change certain beneficiary designations, and pledge property for obligations connected to a business owned by an immediate family member." I sat across from her and said, "Brooke owns a commercial renovation company." Evelyn nodded. "Then this clause is probably written for that company." I asked the question already forming in my head. "Do they have a lender waiting?" She reopened the folder and pointed to a document number in the footer. This package was not prepared as estate planning. It was assembled as part of a financing transaction. Whoever drafted it copied language from a commercial collateral agreement. That was the moment the story changed for me. Until then, I had been hoping Aaron was merely foolish. Maybe Brooke had frightened him with talk about aging parents. Maybe some aggressive financial advisor had convinced them that consolidating authority was responsible, but a financing transaction meant someone needed an asset, and my home was being positioned as the answer. I told Evelyn to find out which lender, using only lawful public filings and whatever records we could access legitimately. Then I called Aaron. He answered on the second ring. "Dad, everything okay?" His voice sounded too casual. I let mine sound confused. "I am trying to understand the paperwork. Brooke said there was a deadline. Are you in some kind of trouble?" Silence. Then he laughed. "No, nothing like that. She is just organized." "You know Brooke," I said. "Do I?" Another silence. "Dad, she is trying to help us get ahead of things. You live alone. You had that dizzy spell last winter." I almost smiled. The dizzy spell had lasted about 6 seconds after I stood too quickly from under my truck while changing the oil. I had mentioned it once over breakfast. Now it had become evidence. "I still handle my own affairs," I said. His tone changed into something softer and more dangerous. "No one is saying you do not. But these things happen fast. We just want the family protected." Family. I had spent decades watching borrowers use beautiful words to conceal ugly numbers. Growth meant debt. Flexibility meant no restrictions. Opportunity meant someone else carrying the risk. Now my own son was using family the same way. I told him I would read everything and we would talk Wednesday. Before hanging up, I asked one more question. "Aaron, what does Brooke's company owe?" His breath stopped for just long enough to answer me. "Why would you ask that?" I said. "Because the document gives you authority to use my house for a family business obligation." He recovered quickly. "Dennis probably used a template. I will ask him." I said goodnight, then sat alone in the dark kitchen until Evelyn came in from the study, carrying her laptop. "You were right," she said. "There is a financing deal." She turned the screen toward me. Brooke's company, Vallecrest Renovation Group, had filed a new UCC financing statement 8 days earlier. A regional lender called Blue Ridge Commercial Capital held a blanket security interest in company assets. That alone did not alarm me. Businesses borrowed money every day. Then Evelyn scrolled. There was also a lawsuit filed by a concrete supplier for unpaid invoices, a mechanics lien dispute, and 2 judgments totaling more than $300,000. "How bad?" I asked. "Publicly visible. Bad enough that a new lender would demand additional collateral." I looked toward the window. Outside, my porch light illuminated the empty chair where Margaret used to sit every evening in summer. "They are trying to turn my home into additional collateral." Evelyn shook her head. "They are trying to get you to authorize it voluntarily," Which matters. They cannot just take your property. They need your signature. That answer settled something inside me because it gave me the legal clarity the situation demanded. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been sold. My house was still mine. They needed me. That meant I had time. "Do not stop them yet," I said. Evelyn frowned. "Thomas." I held up a hand. "I am not signing anything. I want to know what Aaron is involved in before I decide what comes next." She knew me well enough not to mistake that for revenge. I was not interested in destroying my son. I wanted the truth, while he still believed I was too old to find it. By Wednesday afternoon, the truth had grown teeth. Evelyn's investigator did not hack anyone's accounts or pull some magical file from a secret server. We did it the boring way, which is usually the way real trouble reveals itself. Court records, corporate filings, recorded liens, lawsuits, public permit disputes, a former employee willing to speak after his wages had gone unpaid, a subcontractor who had already sued. By 3 o'clock, we knew Valecrest had expanded too fast after Brooke landed 3 hotel renovation contracts in Louisville and Cincinnati. She had borrowed against expected payments, then used those borrowed funds to start 2 more projects before the first clients had paid. When material costs rose and one hotel owner disputed nearly $400,000 in change orders, her cash flow collapsed. Aaron had personally guaranteed several obligations because Brooke's balance sheet was too weak to qualify a loan. His salary as operations director at a logistics company had once been comfortable. Now, almost every dollar he earned was servicing debt. Together, they were responsible for just over $1.4 million, with a $600,000 bridge loan scheduled to mature Friday at 4 p.m. The lender had apparently offered an extension only if they provided additional real estate collateral with sufficient equity. My house and land had been appraised the previous year at $940,000. That number sat in my mind like a fingerprint. Someone had known exactly what my property was worth. I called Aaron again and asked him to come alone. He arrived just before sunset. I met him on the back porch, where he had eaten watermelon as a boy, and where Margaret once bandaged his knee after he fell from the oak tree. He looked thinner than he had at the wedding. "Where is Brooke?" I asked. "Working." He would not sit until I did. I placed the unsigned agreement between us. "Tell me how much you owe." His jaw tightened. "Dad, I told you, the paperwork is just planning. $600,000 is due Friday." His face went white. I continued. "Valecrest has unpaid subcontractors, 2 judgments, disputed invoices, and Blue Ridge Commercial Capital wants more collateral before it extends your bridge loan. My house has enough equity to give them what they want." He stood so quickly his chair scraped the porch boards. "You had someone investigate us?" I looked up at him. "You brought an attorney into my dining room and tried to put my home behind your wife's debt without telling me. What did you expect me to do?" He paced to the railing and gripped it with both hands. For a moment I saw the boy again, but this time confession did not come. Anger did. "You do not understand what we are dealing with. Brooke has 30 employees. Families depend on those jobs. If the lender pulls the line, the company collapses." I said, "Then why not ask me for help?" He turned toward me. "Because you would say no. You never gave me the chance." His eyes flashed. "You spent my whole life teaching me not to ask you for anything. Work harder. Earn it yourself. Stand on your own. You think I did not hear that?" That hurt because there was some truth in it. Margaret had occasionally told me I confused independence with distance, but truth does not excuse deception. "So, your answer was to hide my house inside a power of attorney?" I asked. He looked away. "We were going to make the payments." "With what money?" He had no answer. I leaned back. "Did Brooke write the document?" "Dennis did." "Did you tell him I had agreed?" Silence. "Aaron," he finally said, I told him you wanted me to handle your affairs. I felt something colder than anger. So you lied to an attorney about my consent. I did not say you signed anything. Not yet. He stared at me. Then he said the sentence that ended whatever hope I still had, that this was simply panic. Dad, you are sitting on property you barely use. We are trying to save a real business. There are people whose livelihoods matter more than a house with memories in it. I could hear Brooke in those words, but they came from my son's mouth. And if I lose the house? I asked. He exhaled hard. You would not. But even if something went wrong, you could downsize. You are one person in a place built for a family. There it was. My life reduced to inefficient square footage. I looked at him and thought of all the years Margaret and I had quietly helped without telling him. Tuition shortfall his scholarship did not cover. The used car he thought I negotiated down, when I had actually paid the difference. The down payment match, we told him, came from a first-time buyer program. Not because we wanted control, but because we wanted him to feel capable. Maybe that had been our mistake. Maybe we had protected his pride so well, he mistook our silence for limitation. I folded the agreement and slid it toward him. Tell Brooke and Dennis I will meet them Friday at 2. Aaron's shoulders dropped in relief. You will sign? I gave him the same answer he had given me. We will talk as a family. That night, I opened the cabinet in my study, where Margaret's estate records were kept. Hidden wealth sounds glamorous when people hear the number, but ours had never looked glamorous. It looked like partnership agreements, tax schedules, property maps, insurance binders, and quarterly reports. Margaret's father had started Keene Industrial Properties with 2 small warehouses in 1978. Margaret inherited a minority interest, expanded it carefully, and eventually bought out several relatives who wanted cash. By the time she died, the partnership owned 12 light industrial and commercial properties across Kentucky and southern Ohio. I had spent 8 years quietly overseeing it with a professional management firm. My controlling interest was worth a little over $18 million, depending on valuations. Aaron knew none of that. We had discussed telling him after he turned 40, but Margaret became sick, and after she died, I could never find a moment that did not feel like grief doing the talking. I opened the current property schedule and searched for an address that had been bothering me since Evelyn mentioned Brooke's company. Valecrest's headquarters was in a converted brick warehouse near Newtown Pike. I had been there once for a company Christmas party but had never paid attention to the ownership. There it was. Property number KIP 07. Keene Industrial Properties owned the building through a limited liability company. Brooke's business was my tenant. I sat back and laughed once, not because it was funny, but because life sometimes builds a circle so complete you cannot believe it until you see where the ends meet. Brooke was trying to use my house to rescue a company that operated inside a building I already controlled. The next morning, I met with Evelyn and Martin Lowe, the partnership's property manager. I made one rule immediately: no retaliation. We enforce the lease exactly as written, nothing more. Martin nodded. Valecrest was already 19 days late on rent and had requested a 30-day extension. Under ordinary circumstances, we probably would have granted it. I told Martin to continue evaluating that request based on normal standards. I was not going to manufacture a crisis just because I had leverage. Then Evelyn gave me the next surprise. Blue Ridge Commercial Capital's senior credit officer had called her back. His name was Samuel Givens, a man I knew from 20 years earlier when he was a junior analyst at my bank. Evelyn had not told him I was involved until she confirmed he was handling Valecrest. When he learned my house had been offered as potential collateral through a power of attorney I had not agreed to, he requested a meeting immediately. They already submitted a draft collateral package, he told us over a secure conference call. It identifies Aaron Keene as your intended attorney, in fact, and states that family real estate support is expected. I asked, did they represent that I had consented? Samuel paused. The package says consent is pending final execution, but the narrative implies the arrangement has been discussed and approved. It was carefully written. Not a forged signature. Not yet. But enough misrepresentation to make a lender believe the last step was ceremonial. Samuel continued. Thomas, I cannot discuss their full credit file without authorization, but I can tell you this. If the additional collateral is unavailable, the extension request changes materially. I said, then evaluate it without my property. My house is not collateral. Understood. I could have ended the matter right there, but I wanted Aaron and Brooke to understand what they had done, not merely suffer the result. So we scheduled Friday's meeting at Valacrest's headquarters. Brooke believed I was coming to sign. Dennis, the attorney, believed he was completing the transaction. Aaron believed he had convinced me. They did not know Samuel would attend. They did not know Evelyn would attend. They did not know the building itself belonged to a partnership I controlled. Most importantly, they did not know I had already decided that whatever happened next would be determined by their own choices, not by my anger. Friday at 2 p.m., I walked into Valacrest's conference room, wearing the same brown sport coat I had worn to church for 6 years. I wanted no theater, no expensive car, no tailored suit hidden in a cedar closet. I did not need to look richer to become harder to exploit. Brooke sat at the head of the table beside Dennis. Aaron was on her right. 3 sets of documents were arranged in front of an empty chair waiting for me. Brooke stood and smiled brightly. Thomas, I am glad you came. Once we finish this, everyone can breathe again. I took the empty chair but did not touch the pen. Dennis began explaining the power of attorney as though we had never discussed it. He used words like continuity, flexibility, protection, and efficient management. When he reached the collateral provision, he said, This merely gives Aaron options in the unlikely event family assets ever need to be repositioned. I asked, repositioned to secure Valacrest's loan? The room changed. Brooke's smile disappeared. Dennis looked at Aaron. Aaron looked at me. I continued. More specifically, the $600,000 bridge facility that matures at 4 o'clock today. Brooke folded her arms. Aaron told you, I said. Public records told me most of it. Your lender told my attorney the rest after learning my property had been represented as expected collateral. Dennis immediately leaned forward. No one represented that Mr. Keene had signed. Evelyn opened the conference room door behind me and walked in. No, but the submission represented anticipated family support, as though consent were essentially settled. Dennis stared at her. Who are you? Evelyn Price. I represent Thomas Keene. Brooke's face hardened. This is ridiculous. We are talking about saving 30 jobs. I looked at her. Then you should have talked to me about saving 30 jobs, instead of disguising a commercial pledge inside an estate document. She slapped her palm lightly on the table. We did not disguise anything. It is written in plain English. I nodded. Yes, on page 7, which is why I read it. Aaron whispered, Dad, please. I turned to him. Did you tell Dennis I had agreed to let you manage my affairs? He did not answer. Dennis's eyes moved toward him. That told me something new. Brooke jumped in. We were trying to prevent you from becoming overwhelmed. I asked. By what? By complexity. By finances. By aging. There was the word. I waited. She continued, gaining confidence. Thomas, you are almost 70. There is nothing insulting about planning for reality. Aaron is your only child. Eventually, all of this becomes his responsibility anyway. I could feel Evelyn tense beside me, but I stayed calm. All of what? Brooke gestured as if the room contained the answer. Your house, your accounts, whatever savings you have. I said, so because you believe Aaron may inherit something one day, you believe he should be allowed to risk it today. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you built. The conference room door opened again. Samuel Givens entered carrying a thin file. Brooke's face changed before he even introduced himself. She knew him. "Mr. Givens," she said, standing. "I thought our lender call was at 3:30. Samuel remained standing. It was. This meeting replaced it. He sat beside Evelyn. "Blue Ridge has reviewed the extension request without Mr. Keene's residence. The request is declined." Brooke went pale. Aaron closed his eyes. Samuel continued in the neutral tone lenders use when a decision is finished. "The company remains obligated under the existing facility. We are willing to discuss an orderly workout, but the proposed extension based on outside residential collateral is no longer available." Brooke stared at me. "You killed the company." I shook my head. "No. The company's debt existed before you walked into my house." She stood so fast her chair rolled backward. "You have no idea how much is at stake." I said, "I know exactly how much. 1.4 million in combined exposure, 600,000 due today, 30 employees, 19 days of past due rent on this building." She froze. "How do you know about the rent?" I looked at Aaron. He understood first. His mouth opened slightly. I turned back to Brooke. "Because Valecrest's landlord is Keene Industrial Properties." She laughed once. "No, our landlord is Kip Holdings." Evelyn slid a document across the table. "Kip Holdings is a subsidiary." Brooke looked down. I said, "My late wife held the controlling interest in the partnership. I inherited that interest when she died. The management company handles day-to-day operations. I do not personally collect your rent, Brooke, but yes, the building your company occupies is part of the partnership I control." Aaron stared at me as though I had become someone else. "How much?" he whispered. I knew exactly what he meant. I answered, because secrets had contributed enough damage. "The partnership interest is worth a little over $18 million today." No one spoke. Brooke slowly sat down. Aaron looked physically sick. He had not tried to take $900,000 of equity from a poor old man because he needed to survive. He had tried to manipulate a father who could have solved his problem with a conversation. That was the real tragedy. Brooke recovered first. "Then this changes everything." I looked at her. "No. It explains everything." She leaned toward me, suddenly warm again. "Thomas, if you control that kind of capital, then we do not need the house. You can bridge the company directly. We can restructure. You could protect the jobs and receive interest. This could actually become a family investment." I watched her transform attempted coercion into a business proposal within 30 seconds. "And what would Aaron pledge?" I asked. "His share of the partnership, one day?" Her expression told me she had already thought of it. Aaron whispered, "Brooke, stop." She turned on him. "Do you want to lose everything?" he said. "We already lost it when we lied to him." For the first time all week, my son sounded like himself. 3 months later, Valecrest still existed, but not in the form Brooke had imagined. Blue Ridge placed the company into a supervised workout rather than forcing immediate liquidation. 2 profitable contracts were completed under tighter controls. 1 disastrous project was terminated, and an outside restructuring firm sold equipment Brooke had financed but did not need. The company shrank from 30 employees to 11. It was painful, but it was real. I did not inject partnership money into the business. I did not forgive the rent, though the property manager approved the same structured repayment plan we would have offered any tenant that could demonstrate a path to solvency. Dennis withdrew from representing Brooke and Aaron after Evelyn challenged his handling of the estate documents, and the state bar began reviewing the matter. No dramatic federal agents burst through a door. No one went to prison for life. What happened was quieter, and to me, more meaningful. Brooke lost the ability to borrow against a story that did not belong to her. Aaron resigned from Valecrest's management and entered financial counseling before filing a personal restructuring plan for obligations he had guaranteed. He moved into a small apartment near his office. Brooke stayed in the condominium they had rented together for another month before they separated. Whether their marriage survives is no longer a question I try to answer. My relationship with Aaron is harder. For 6 weeks he did not call me. I did not chase him. Then one Sunday afternoon he came up the gravel drive alone and found me replacing a broken latch on the barn door. He stood there for a while before saying, "I thought you would have called. I kept tightening the screw. You are 42. He nodded. "I know." After another minute he said, "I was angry at you for having money." I looked at him. He continued, "Not because you had it, because if I had known, I would have asked for help sooner." Then I realized that was still me blaming you for what I did. I put the screwdriver down. He looked older than he had 3 months earlier. "Dad, I told myself it was temporary. I told myself the house would never actually be at risk. I told myself we would make the payments and you would never know the difference. Every time I felt ashamed, I changed the story until I sounded responsible." I said, "That is how people get into trouble, son. They stop asking whether something is right and start asking whether they can explain it." He nodded and wiped his face with both hands. "Can you forgive me?" I told him the truth. "I can forgive you before I trust you again." He cried then. So did I, though I turned away and pretended to inspect the latch. Forgiveness is not a signature either. It does not transfer control. It does not erase consequences. It simply means I refuse to spend the rest of my life carrying poison someone else poured. A month later, I changed my estate plan. Aaron is still included, but not in the way he once would have been. A portion of my assets will eventually pass to him through a professionally managed trust with clear limits. The larger portion of Margaret's partnership interest will fund an education and housing trust for our granddaughter Lily, who is 9 and currently cares more about horses than money. Aaron cannot borrow against it, accelerate it, or use it as collateral. When I told him, he said, "I understand." I believed him. I also kept my own financial power of attorney with Evelyn and a professional fiduciary. Not because I hate my son, because love and control should never be confused again. It has been almost a year now since Brooke first walked into my dining room with that folder. I am 70, still living in the same house, still mowing more grass than any sensible man needs, and still drinking coffee from the chipped mug Margaret bought me 25 years ago. People sometimes hear a story like mine and think the lesson is to hide money from your children. I do not think that is the lesson. Secrecy created problems too. Maybe if Margaret and I had talked more openly with Aaron about money, responsibility, and what we had built, he would have understood that asking for help was not the same as failing. Maybe not. I cannot rewrite that part. What I do know is this: no relationship gives another person the right to your signature. No child becomes the owner of a parent's future simply because inheritance may exist someday. And getting older does not mean surrendering the right to understand what is being done in your name. If a son, daughter, daughter-in-law, son-in-law, brother, sister, or anyone else puts papers in front of you and says, "Do not worry about the details," that is exactly when the details matter most. Read them. Ask questions. Call your own attorney. Take a night. Take a week. Anyone acting in your best interest can survive the inconvenience of you understanding what you are signing. Aaron visits me twice a month now. Sometimes we talk about money. Usually we do not. Last Sunday he helped me repair the fence behind the orchard, and for 3 hours we argued about baseball while replacing rotten posts. It felt ordinary, and ordinary has become precious to me. Before he left, he stood beside his truck and said, "Dad, I used to think being strong meant never needing anyone." I smiled. "I wonder where you got that idea." He laughed, and for the first time in a long time, the laugh sounded like the boy I remembered. I cannot promise what our relationship will become. Trust returns slowly, if it returns at all. But I know what mine will never become again. I will never be a silent asset waiting for someone else to decide how I should be used. My wife spent a lifetime helping build what we had, and I spent a lifetime learning that numbers tell the truth when people do not. Brooke believed an old widower in a faded work shirt would sign away his security because the people asking were family. Aaron believed love would make me easier to control. They were both wrong. Love can make a man patient. It can make him generous. It can make him forgive things he once thought unforgivable. But love should never require a man to close his eyes before he signs his own name.